How do you write in multiple voices as a fiction author and make it feel authentic for your audience? Because one of the main barriers that beginner and intermediate fiction writers have is kind of moving into this zone where they can have 5 to 8 characters in a novel who are starkly different in how they talk, in their personality, how they appear to the reader. Because if characters start to blend into each other, then us, the reader, get thrown out of the experience of the novel and start contemplating the novel. And that's the last thing you want us doing as an author. And in today's presentation, I'm going to be going over the 6 different ways you can create separation and authenticity with your characters in some of your longer pieces of fiction. And my name is Ian, and on this channel, we cover the greatest books and authors of all time. But I also help authors like you gain the skills and the confidence to one day, be on bookshelves across the world. And now going back to you, most of us started writing short stories. That's always been kind of the protocol. You need to write a couple short stories and publish them before you work on your novel. And sometimes people just get straight into novels. But when you are writing something that's 2 to 5,000 words, it's a lot easier just to use external appearances and stark personality differences to kind of drive the 3 to 5 main characters in the short story. Making them appear to have different voices isn't a problem. But if we take those 3 to 5 same voices and put them in a 125,000 word novel, you're going to have to understand the depth and soul of your characters at a deep level if you want to have any attempt of making them seem different across that timeline. But that is not where we start this process, because it is a process of skill, and this is something that you never learn forever. There are authors like Cormac McCarthy or David Foster Wallace who at the end of their career were still getting accused of their characters sounding the same. And Wallace talks about this in a quote talking about his first novel that says, "I think at the beginning I had 2 voices I could do well. One was hers and the other was this hypersensitive, really intellectual voice. One of the weaknesses in the book is that a lot of the characters seem to have the same voice." And so now I'd like to ponder, now I'd like you to ponder, what are the voices you can do well right now? Like, I personally can do kind of the creepy, demented, solitary incel white guy voice pretty well. 2 of my earlier practice novels that probably will never get published because I just used them as practice featured that voice, and so many other short stories too. So how about you guys comment down below and tell me, what 1 or 2 voices do you guys know that you have down? And most of the time, if you wrote an entire novel featuring a main character or something, or have done a lot of short stories that are similar, that's the voice. And moving into step number 1, I hate to do this because this is the most cliche prescription in all of writing, but no writer in their first novel, no one steps onto the scene unless they've been like training in the back for a decade or 2 and like not releasing anything, being able to do this well. Someone like David Foster Wallace admitted that he only had 2 voices. And really the only requirement, especially in today's publishing landscape, is to have more than 1 voice. Everyone can't be talking in 1 voice. But if you can get that number to 2, then you're not going to write a legendary novel or maybe a great novel, but you could do a good novel. So I'm not here to say that you have to sit here for 20 years and then one day you'll finally be able to do this and be a real author. But I'm in this process right now. It's going to take time just writing and playing with characters and kind of immersing ourselves in this idea of these different voices to be able to kind of get into the flow of it. Because how did you get so good at the voice that you've mastered, that you commented down below? Well, I think partially it has to do with something related to your personal life. And and if it wasn't you living it, it was someone in your family or a close friend or a character in a book or movie that you liked that kind of inspired that, and you understood it at a deep level. And so there was all this secret time that got dumped into that process that you maybe don't see on the outside. But how much time have you dumped into, girls that are 16 to 18 Gen Zers right now? Or if we go back in time, young women in the 1980s, you probably don't have that voice down very well, even if you were alive then or have thought about it, because it actually takes a lot of nuance. And the way you can start to train yourself in this regard, moving on to step number 2, which kind of connects to number 1, is writing a lot of different stories. And this could be longer novels, but I would prefer and recommend that you guys, especially if you're on the kind of beginning stages of your writing career or intermediate stages, I'm going to start doing this again, just as like a training system, is that Ray Bradbury, one of the more famous American authors of all time, recommends it. You write 1 short story a week. And that if you do that for a year or 2, you are going to be a great author. He says that there are going to be 5 or 6 stories in there that are going to be great, that you're going to be, because you're going to have over 100 that will get published no matter what. You can't write 100 short stories without a couple being pretty good, or at least editable enough to be published. But what's even more important about that process is that you have 100 short stories, and you're going to start to gain experience in some of these voices. Because if you just sit for 5 years and work on a novel, right? And you're like, I'm doing my novel. This is all I care about. And let's say you finish, and let's say you get it published. Well, maybe you worked on a couple voices, but you're going to go into your next project somewhat dry. And something I've realized as an author, I'm sure you guys have too, is that as you were working on something, the skills don't seem to be there. And what do I mean by that? So let's say you want to write a novel about a critique of the suburban world, kind of like a Richard Yates Revolutionary Road type thing, but it's set in a modern environment in Ohio with a female lesbian electrician. Okay, so you're going to set out and you're going to do that. And you probably don't know very much about that voice or how you're going to do it. And you're going to be developing it. But then once it gets published, you're going to look back and see all the different things that you could have done better. I go through this all the time. I'm like, oh my God, this doesn't seem authentic anymore. But and by the end, you're going to have, once it gets published, you will have that kind of very appreciated and nuanced point of view on that one voice. But always in the process, I never feel like I'm actually capturing it or understanding it because it's still in this kind of creative space that hasn't cemented itself yet. And so you have to assume that if you're moving from big project to big project and you're never playing around, you're never messing around, you're never writing about different things just for fun, you may never get exposed to some of these alternative voices that are going to come up. And this is where I think that short story prescription, or just writing them, or writing characters, or creating characters and writing about them just for fun, is really important. Or one could say writing more of a like Infinite Jest or like Chaucerian type book that's long and features all these different characters. You could, if you're doing stuff like that, get away with that. But that is a much bigger ask as a novelist, and going to be much harder for people to read, much harder to get published. And if you're a beginner, like I said, much harder to pull off. And so as a beginner, though, one of the best things that you can do is find someone who just reads your work, someone who is honest and, intelligent, maybe a couple people, and you have these one short story a week, and you just send it to someone. You don't say, don't edit it, don't do anything crazy, just tell me what you think. And they're going to tell you, like, for instance, my sister is this for me, and she'll tell me, she's like, Ian, they don't fucking talk like this. Like this Ohio lesbian who's an electrician would never say this. And I'll be like, no, well, maybe, but then you realize, like, oh, other people have different perspectives. They see things differently, and they're not in this kind of creative space. They're seeing this objectively. So by helping and reviewing with others, especially in this realm of voices, this is where I think beta readers and peer readers are the most important. In a lot of ways, they're really not. They miss out and screw up a lot of things. But I think this is something you can find someone that you trust would be extremely helpful to you. The next step number 4, is that you need to do heavy research into that voice. A lot of authors steal from their personal life. David Foster Wallace basically took all the same people from his halfway house that he was living in and put it into Infinite Jest. He took a lot of the people he met in tennis, like a lot of the no-lifers and stuff, and just put them in there. He understood those voices because he was stuck with them for months. Cormac McCarthy, one time, and this is a story probably most of you have never heard, was actually doing some stonemason work in the middle of Knoxville with his friend. So his friend did it for a living and asked Cormac if he could come help him on some project. And Cormac was like, sure, because the other guy had lost his employer or something. So they're sitting there working on it, and they're in downtown Knoxville. And the guy is trying to talk to Cormac, small talk that you do out on the job. And Cormac tells him, shut up. I'm trying to listen to people. I'm trying to hear their conversations. And he was implying that was helping his writing. And McCarthy wasn't some reclusive individual. He was actually more social than 99% of authors. He just didn't like to give interviews and talk to people like me, like, what happened in Blood Meridian, bro? But okay, so you have to, first of all, try to talk to that person. If you could find an Ohioan lesbian electrician or someone who kind of fits that bill to talk to and, get a lot of information from, that's going to make this instantly easier. If you could read about them or people who are similar to the voice that you're trying to do, that's important too. I mean, for my Cormac McCarthy course, we're starting the Blood Meridian course, and I just did like an hour and a half on everything that Cormac McCarthy stole from other authors. Like, he would steal the most random stuff. And that's important for you to do. And that's why reading is so important, because you have all these different voices in your head. Suddenly you'll realize in your novel, like, damn, maybe I need a weird Asian dude in here. Oh, let's go look. I know let's go find any Murakami character. That will be fine. And then if you mark your notes, if you remember, if you have a good memory, or like tab your books or things like that, you'll be able to kind of turn back and be able to see these things almost instantly. And that's something to be said about either having a photographic memory or having at least some catalog of your writing so that you can go back and find these characters, find these scenes that you want to implement. Last but not least, if you can't do any of this, you can listen. Like you can find people online, even on TikTok, and get their general mannerisms and embody it. But we're talking here about the soul level. One of the worst mistakes that you can make, and this is step number 5, is that you write in cliches, that you make these characters like you're trying to show me, like, I know what this person is like. This is what they do. This is like that's not what we want. We don't want the outside stuff. We don't want these lines that are almost like signaling to me, the reader, that you know what you're talking about. That is a terrible idea. And no one really does that. We need smaller things. We need to be roped in. It's a very nuanced thing. It relies on, like I said, the soul level, on the personality. And so how do you accomplish that? Well, that moves us into our last step number 6, which is you have to let your imagination run wild here. And you can do this in many different ways. There are people who are a little bit more logical or like to plot. I do this sometimes if I'm really stuck or trying to gain some depth. And you do like character analysis sheets. You find like that a list of questions, 200 questions about a character, especially if it's a main character. What's your favorite thing to do? What all these different things, and then you write like 2 paragraphs about it, and you go really deep into this process about this character. And so that is somewhat of a creative side, but you could also work all through all this in your drafts, because you should be writing 6 or 7 drafts that take you months and months, if not a year, to complete if you're trying to write something legendary. Finishing something really fast is awesome, and at the start of your career that's probably better, just to kind of get some shit out of the way and get the process going. But most of the greatest authors that I follow, that I personally love, spend anywhere from 6 months to a year on each one of their drafts, just rewriting basically the whole thing, not in a National Novel Writing Month way where you're doing 1,600 words a day, but like in a nuanced way, like actually sitting and like plotting through it, probably more at a 500 to 600 words a day pace. And then eventually, as the drafts continue, like sitting down and revising every single one of these sentences. And in this, you can let your imagination run wild. And over to the side, in the margins, you can make notes. You can ask some of these questions. You can explore these things. That's something that I'm going to bring to the table that no one else has done yet about Cormac McCarthy. He'd be writing his drafts, and on the side, in his earlier drafts, he would say, Judge Holden has to have a weakness. He can't do this. He can't do that. Focus, and he'll tell himself, rewrite this on the next draft. And so you have to be dialoguing with yourself. You have to also have a relationship with yourself and be understanding that this all needs work, this all needs progress. But I would honestly recommend, especially at the start, to do some of those character analysis sheets. Really dive into the soul, because if you can't really do this intuitively, which is fine. Some people just can't do that. I don't know if I can. Everyone thinks they can. I think I can. Of course I can do that. But I just find it great fun to answer questions about characters. And if you have 3 to 5 and you spend 3 or 4 hours kind of exploring their character and who they are, and let's say that takes you 20 hours, I think over the course of the thousands of hours, hopefully, that you're spending on your novel, that you're going to make us spend our time on, I think that would be very well suited to that process, because it's a callback. You can always call back, as you're writing, you could be like, oh yeah, they like this because of that. Do I still agree with what I wrote a long time ago? And you can go back in your notebook and see something that your imagination brought forward in kind of in a very creative way. I've actually found some of the best parts of, any story I've ever written in some of those sheets. As I'm writing, I'm like, wow, this is why he's scared. This is why he's fearful about these aspects of life. And, I get all this backstory, and it's like, damn, that's pretty deep. But if I was just writing and thinking on my own, I maybe never would have gotten there. Because as I'm in the process of writing, when you're doing a character analysis worksheet, or like a character building, like questions, no one's going to read that. But there's kind of this hidden inherent pressure as you're writing a draft. You're like, okay, this is heading toward publication in people's eyes one day. So I've sometimes felt a little bit stunted with creating the story as I'm writing, and somewhat prefer, especially as I'm figuring out what I want a novel to encompass, just free writing, just like spending 2 hours a day free writing all about the novel, whatever I want, just thinking about it, not plotting anything like logical, just random ideas. And then in all those random ideas, you get kind of the core of the story and a lot of the fire stuff that's going to be shocking to readers later on. So what do you guys recommend? How did you guys? I know there's some expert authors out there way further along than I am, than you guys are. What did you guys do to kind of get onto this journey of creating these different voices that seem authentic? This is what I personally do. And I think that if you aren't specifically following some form of a protocol or thinking about how to make it different, they're going to end up becoming the same, especially over a longer piece of fiction. I get it all the time. People send me their novels every single day, even though I say in the email, "Don't send me your novel." And sometimes I'll look through it for a little bit. I'm like, okay, I can tell entire thing reads exactly the same. That's really one of my main complaints about reading like submitted novels. I'm like, oh my god, like this is going to be the longest thread of an idea and of a feeling ever. 100,000 words. That's what we don't want. And I hope that you guys can get that contrast, get that differentiation, and all that good stuff. And I will see you guys in the next video.